This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm your co-host, Eric Bale, and I'm joined by this guy. Do you know your name?
Do you know my name?
This is Hayden Gillethy. We've been doing this long enough. I know your name.
We have. I could see you still getting me confused with Kelsey, though. Since she's still just kind of keeping the seat warm until she comes back.
She is only a couple more episodes. As much as I loved our time together, it's going to be soon.
I'm not going away.
No,
I'll just be behind.
It's true.
In front, so.
You'll be doing your producer job,
which is probably where I belong.
No, I've really enjoyed this time together. Well, I'm excited for today's conversation. We've got a great topic, something that I need a lot of, which is making time for personal growth, Hayden.
This topic is just so perfect because I think that we've all at various times during our professional careers have kind of gotten into the mode of putting out fires and not putting ourselves or other people's growth in front. And so I think this is a really good topic, and I can't wait to see what kind of advice we get.
Preach, Hayden, preach, because I feel like the last 2 years have been nothing but a constant fire.
Yeah.
Taking care of yourself, taking care of the family, taking care of, am I working from the office? Am I working from home? Getting used to a new work environment, all those things. And there feels like a bit of normalcy coming, right? Depending on where you're at and what your experience has been. But I think making time for yourself for personal growth just felt like something you put on the back burner. And I think, right, if you talk about wanting to feel appreciated, wanting to feel like you're growing in your job, I think these things are really important. So that's what we're going to dive in today's episode. And wow, do we have an awesome guest. I'm so pumped to introduce you. His name is Jones Loflin. He's a keynote speaker. He's an author and he is a coach. And his passion is to help individuals like you and I, Hayden, make the best choices with their time so they can thrive. Jones, welcome to Benefits Buzz.
Oh, hey, Eric and Hayden, what a pleasure. My energy is already going up just listening to the two of you banter. So I'm excited about what we're going to unearth today to help folks make better choices with their time.
Well, I need a lot of help with making better choices. And I think if I think of our HR pros, like everyone's trying to take care of themselves, making their times to make better choices, but they're also always thinking about their employees. And so I can't wait to dive into what can they learn to grow themselves, but what can they pass along to all of their employees, the organization. So maybe let's just kick off this conversation. Jones, you are an expert in this field. And so I would love for you to just give us a quick background on why you're so passionate about this and how you got into this line of business.
Sure, Eric. Thanks for the kind words. Now, I will have to take issue with one thing you said. I might be a little further along than some on this idea of time management, work-life success, but I still struggle. In fact, I tell people that when I have it all figured out, I'll be dead and it won't matter as far as managing our time well. But yeah, my background is I'm a former educator here in North Carolina. Did that for a few years, then moved into training and development with that focus of time management, then really sharpening that to work-life success, what some might call work-life balance. And so that's been my passion now for 27 years to help individuals in that way. I work with a lot of corporate audiences as well as nonprofits and government institutions. Also do a fair amount of coaching around leadership, dealing with overload, and that whole concept of work-life success.
Perfect. And in researching this topic, I mean, you were definitely top of mind, especially when I was doing some research. You have some great videos on your website, and obviously at the end, we definitely want you to plug your website too. But, when thinking about this topic, Eric, kind of touched on it with the pandemic, but do you feel that this is an area that has gotten more challenging for people over the last couple of years, or is this just something that is getting a lot more attention now?
There's no question that managing our time well, our schedules, really managing our schedules, managing our expectations, managing our energy, it's gotten infinitely harder. People are so distracted by, first it was the pandemic, and now there's all these other different things going on. I mean, just being able to hold your focus for more than a few minutes at work or at home has become increasingly difficult at a time when more and more is expected of the employees in an organization, right? We've got so much shuffling going on with organizations. We've got intellectual knowledge leaving. We've got people changing positions. And so we need the people who are in place to deliver their best work. They're struggling to do that because they're so distracted. So I feel for HR professionals these days and the tough job they have to try to keep people focused, productive, engaged in our workplaces, because it's tough, as you well know.
Yeah, it's tough for me, and I'm just worried about myself. I can't imagine, right, worrying about a collective, an employee collective. So I think we've touched on it, but right, why is this so important? And whether we're calling this, I feel like part of this is like, better time management, or is it like I've heard the term growth management? Why is it imperative that we do this? I think this is always, and this is, again, I always speak from my own experience, but personal growth just feels like one of those things I want to make time for, and then it's always the first thing that gets cut because whether there's a fire I need to put out or something's happening, obviously
meetings.
yeah, exactly. There's meetings, whatever it might be. So tell us, why is this so imperative, Jones?
Yeah. Let me use an example from one of my books, Juggling Elephants. In that book, I talk about how we need to manage our work and life like it's a circus. And of course, I know who the two clowns are, no question there. But manage our work and life. You're a little slow today. Come on now, more coffee. But seriously, that we have three rings to our life circus, if you will, and that we have to manage well. We have a work ring, we have a self ring, and we have a relationship ring. And all three have to be managed well. And it's fascinating in some of my training sessions when I'll ask the question, once I've introduced that idea that we have three rings, I'll say, how many of you in here would say that your work ring is the most important? You might get a couple people raise their hand. Then I'll say, well, how many of you would say your relationship ring is most important? You get a couple people raise their hand. I say, how many would say your self ring is most important? You get a few people raise their hand. I'll say, who's right? And of course, some smart aleck in the audience will go, we all are. I'm like, what do you mean, sir? And they're like, well, they're all three important. I'm like, yes. And I'll say, but which one do we neglect most often? And of course, you'll hear a collective self across the audience, because the circus teaches us that all three are important. And if we neglect one of them, it impacts our ability to perform well in the other two. So your question was, why is this important? Is because they're all three important. We've got to take better care of ourselves if we're going to be more effective at work. We've got to take better care of our relationships if we're going to be more happy with ourselves. They're all connected. They're not separate.
Well, and the fallout of that in not really like confronting those things and having that kind of balance, really, I think from an HR perspective, is probably going to show up in things like recruiting and retention, or it's going to show up in like just even innovation in the office. Are there any other pieces that you can really think of when you're thinking about it from an HR perspective or from business perspective that a business would really feel in not making sure that their employees are tackling those three rings?
Burnout too,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and you said it best. Both of you did. Is that just being mindful that if you're an HR professional, that everyone in that organization has those three rings. And many times what we might see as a work performance issue it's not about work at all. They're having a tough time in a relationship with one of their children or with their significant other, or they've got an aging parent. And so I think for HR professionals to teach managers in organizations that, you got to stop and think about what is going on with this person. Is it just they just don't get how to do the job, or they are overloaded, or is there something else going on? So one of the things I coach a lot of people on is managers on is being curious, not just thinking, oh, it's this. Pause for a moment and ask some questions and ask the right kinds of questions that get the information in a professional environment to kind of see what's going on and see where they may need guidance or assistance. And it may mean they just want somebody to listen. They don't have anybody who's been willing to take the 2 minutes to listen to them talk about some of their challenges and problems.
No, that's a good suggestion. And I think, with a lot of these topics, they seem like duh, this is something we should be doing, but right, then the real world gets in the way. And so what I'd love to hear, Jones, is right, because we work in the real world, like this is a wonderful concept, but what are the hurdles? Like I have to say, like you must, when you talk to employees or talk to employers, there must be common hurdles about why this is so hard to roll out or so hard to implement or so hard to get employees to actually take that time. What do you hear most common?
Yeah, it's interesting. What I hear most often is just getting people to stop long enough to be fully present with a member of their team, or with someone in the organization. You mentioned fires, and it's a recurring word. It's so easy to listen long enough to think you know what fire you need to put out, and to say, okay, here's what you need to do. Bye. Instead of stopping to say, what's the bigger picture here? How do I focus on helping this person and also growing them in this moment, and help so that the next time they have this challenge, that they'll be able to handle it on their own versus having to come back to me as the manager. And that's really hard for organizations when they're short staffed and where they're just trying to get so much done, to think about that bigger picture of growth versus just, well, for lack of a better phrase, putting out more fires.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I could totally insert a sports analogy. Do I dare?
Go for it, Hayden.
Okay,
Yes,
well,
yes, yes.
I mean, because you're talking about being present, and this is like really resonating with me too. Because I mean, if you watched like something like the Michael Jordan documentary series or whatnot, like the value of being present and like how difficult it is for people to really do that, to just focus on the moment and where they're at in that moment. So how do you kind of trickle that down? I mean, when you're looking at what areas can employers most improve upon, or even if even if you have a couple of tips, like when you're doing these coaching sessions of like, what can employers really tangibly be doing in rethinking how they're spending their time?
Mm. Yeah, there's a couple pieces there. When I think about employers working with employees, I think it starts with being clear with what your goals are. What are the outcomes you want? And if an employer is not clear about that and they haven't communicated it well to the employee, how do they expect the employee to deliver their best work? How do they expect them to focus if they don't have the right metrics in place to understand how their time should be used? So I think that's on the employer side. On the employee side, I think it's being willing to ask for help and to ask for clarification and say, this is where I had planned on investing my time, or this is what my day looks like, or this is what my week looks like. Is that in alignment with what you believe is most important for me to be focused on right now? And when you feel like you're overloaded or have too much going on, is to be willing to have that tough conversation with your manager, with your direct report, to say, if I'm focusing on this, I'm not so sure I'm going to be able to give attention to this, in the way that it should. And so that they don't hold that in. Then a month later, they just feel like they're drowning. And then, they're scrolling through Indeed.com, instead of getting their work done because they're just so frustrated. So I guess I'd pull all that together, in that rambling is, I think it comes back to communication. You got to have good communication in place, because without that, these other things won't matter.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. I definitely feel that. And I think also, and this goes with almost everything in the workplace, right? You emulate what you see your managers and supervisors do. So I have to imagine that if your managers and supervisors are making it a priority or bringing it up with you or setting a good example, there's a more likelihood that actually will trickle down, as well. And that needs to be instilled probably with the help of HR too. But are you seeing, is there a direct correlation between the kind of examples that a supervisor or manager might set and what kind of actually time for self-growth an individual would get?
Mhm.
Oh, completely. Sometimes it's simple as a manager, when they're having a weekly team meeting, reminding, I didn't turn my phone, or I didn't have my phone with me all day Saturday. I didn't even look at it. Or, you know what? It was such a busy week for me last week that, Friday afternoon, I just, left the office early, took a little, PTO. It's just saying those kinds of things is so important to remind the rest of the team that, wow, they are focused on personal wellness. I should be too. So I think that's the first step. I think the second one is for that manager to, be asking. of their team members. Yeah, wow, I know it's been really crazy lately. What have you been doing to kind of take care of yourself? Because I know it's been draining. And if they say, well, nothing, I can't, I'm just really busy. Hey, we're all busy. I want to make sure you're taking care of you. And just saying things like that reminds those team members that this is important. And it's something you need to make a priority.
Yeah, one other thing, I'll jump in on an example that I saw of a manager who used to work different types of hours, and he or she would respond during off work hours, there would always be a note that would say, "Hey, I work at different hours. Just because I, sent this after work hours doesn't mean I expect a response from you outside of traditional work hours as well." Like almost setting that precedence, like I don't need a response right away, but this is when I'm working and that's okay. Kind of I think that was
Mhm.
really powerful too. So.
Oh, I love that. What a wonderful example, Hayden. Yeah, you established healthy boundaries. You set the expectation, because I'll never forget. I was working with one organization on work life success, and I was coaching some of their middle managers, and it was fascinating for them to say, yeah, when my boss sends me something at 11 p.m., I feel like I need to respond. I said, well, have you ever asked them if you need to? Well, no, I just thought I needed to.
Yeah.
And so that's not just on the employee, that's on the manager, like you said, who didn't practice. Say, hey, this is my in the zone time is 10 to 12 p.m. at night. So I may send you something, but that doesn't mean you need to respond. That's just when I'm working. I mean, so your example is just spot on.
I love that. And I feel like a couple of big takeaways here in this conversation are really like, setting those priorities, but communicating those priorities often gets forgotten about.
Right.
And, I love that you're reinforcing that message, because I think that's really important. We've spent so much time talking about these challenges, Jones. What are some of the success stories? I mean, when in your vast experience of doing this keynote speaking and
Yeah.
coaching, have you had any clients or individuals come back to you with real change following some of these suggestions?
Give us some hope, Jones. Tell them there's hope out there.
Oh, you're kind. And I would love to talk about, I mean, it really, because I teach and train around metaphors or analogies. I mean, we talked about the circus analogy for work-life success. I use a gardening analogy for leadership and management. People get to look at where they are and what needs to change. I don't have to be the expert in the room. They just kind of look at the model and go, okay, what needs to be different for me? And so my number one success story that I always share is that I was working with a hospitality group, and the CEO came up to me and had a copy of my book, Juggling Elephants, and he held it up and he said, "Your book saved my marriage." I'm like, yes! But it was the whole thing that he, for the three rings, he was recognizing that he wasn't coming out of the work ring when he was at home with his wife in the evening. And so by helping him to see, okay, yeah, I've been in my work ring. Now it's time to be in my relationship ring for a couple hours each evening. That was a win for him. And I credit the circus analogy for that. Organizationally, I think of Tractor Supply Corporation, who I worked with them on some of their manager training and just helping them with this whole idea of work-life success and understanding the work's always going to be there. How can you show up in the best way possible when you're working so that you can walk away in the evening and say, I gave it my best today. Now I need to go over here and I need to recharge and renew myself so that I can be more effective the next day. Those are some immediate ones that come to mind. The key is, I think, you talk about hope, Hayden, is determining what your next step is. When I work with a lot of my clients and I say, well, where are you feeling overwhelmed or overloaded? They'll go, everywhere. I'm like, that's not helpful. I can't help you with everything. Pick one. And so I think that's the message I would share is pick one. Make it a small one. What's a small source of overload, or what's a place where you're feeling a little bit of stress, and deal with that. Don't try to deal with the big ones. Start small and make progress, and use that momentum to deal with the bigger issues and challenges you're facing.
Those are great suggestions, and what a nice accolade to say that you've been able to save a marriage. That's high praise.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love
Thank
it. And
you.
the thing is, I love the three ring analogy, because I've been working from home basically for almost 2 years straight. And those rings get so blended where in the space that you've got your personal ring and your relationship ring and your work ring, right? Usually those spatial things will help you separate them. But when they're all together, you have to mentally make that decision. So I'm going to keep that with me. I'm going to put it in my pocket, Jones. Thank you. And I love that because I think that's a great tip. I was going to ask you which one tip you'd leave, and I think that is the best one. So maybe what we'll do to wrap this up is I feel like, and I know that we just hit the tip of the iceberg with what you've got to share, Jones. So I want to make sure our listeners get a chance to learn more if they want to. Where should they go? Where can they learn more about your book and some of your content?
Sure, Hayden. Thank you for that. JonesLoflin.com, of course, is the jumping off point to see more about my work. I know a lot of your listeners are on YouTube and other social media platforms. At YouTube, on my channel, I have something called the Jones Zone, where I have over 300 3-minute videos on topics from procrastination to making better choices, how to ask questions as a leader, how to listen more effectively as a leader. So if you just go to YouTube, type in Jones Loflin, you'll find that there. And of course, my books are available at Amazon, anywhere books are sold as well.
Well, we'll make sure and get those in the show notes so people can search those down. You've been a fantastic guest. Love your energy as well, Jones. This has been a really good, insightful podcast. Lots of really easy things. Nice analogies to keep it simple for me.
A couple of clowns like us.
a couple of clowns like us. Exactly. And I know a lot of the HR pros listening can definitely take those things. And again, for themselves, for self-improvement, but also great tips to pass along. So we want to thank you so much, Jones, for coming on the show. And we're going to make sure and put some of these tips to work for us as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Hayden and Eric, and thanks for the work you're doing. It's so needed for HR professionals out there. So I'm glad people are tuning into your messages and taking them to heart.
Thanks so much. You certainly saved our work marriage, right, Hayden?
I feel better already.
Thanks so much, Jones. Take care.
My pleasure.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.